Welcome to our the first of the professional division sponsored panels of the conference this year. As you know, the AHA is becoming much more involved has become much more involved over the years with career issues and the many kinds of jobs that one can seek as a PhD or perhaps even a master's in history. And we've put together a panel this morning of people, all of whom have PhDs in history, but do very different kinds of work. And the idea here is that they will tell you, warts and all, about what they do, why they do it, how they got into it, and probably how they do it as well. And I'm going to do something a little bit different in terms of the introduction. We normally do that kind of very formal introduction of, you know, they wrote this and they went here and they went that. I'm simply going to say that we have 4 people with PhDs in history, all of whom do incredibly interesting and different kinds of work, and I'm going to let them talk themselves about what they do. That gives us a bit more time. It means we can hand over to you guys for discussion, questions rather more quickly if we do that, and I think it's a much more fun and less formal way of doing things. I'm simply going to start at the end and move this way. Amy French will be our first speaker, Andy Rotter, Jamil Senel, and Valerie Paley. Thank you, Amy, if you would like to start.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, wonderful. Hi, I'm Amy French, and I teach at Delta College. Delta is a community college in mid-Michigan. And so when I was trying to think about, well, what would people want to know about being a community college professor? What kind of questions? I thought back to what it was like when I first made that decision. And I think that decision is one that when you're nearing, closer to the end of your dissertation phase and you're looking ahead, I really didn't have much of a doubt in my mind that I wanted to go to a community college. I wanted one in particular. And it was interesting at that point, because if I didn't get into Delta, I probably was going to look elsewhere outside of the community college. I'm actually very happy, though, that I did get into Delta, but then decided that community colleges were the right place for me, because they absolutely were. I think of my job a lot like, the PhD in the community college is like the general practitioner. You have general practitioners and you have specialists as MDs. And I think of us like the general practitioners of academia. I need a large breadth of knowledge. I get asked questions all the gamut. The focus of our career, how we achieve promotion and tenure, and I'll speak to Delta, but I think these are more universal, it's really categorized into 3 categories. You are definitely promoted and tenured based on your teaching ability and teaching effectiveness. Service plays a large role in professional development. As far as teaching goes, well, first off, you'll have the best students you can ever imagine. That's one thing that I think a lot of people wonder, well, what's a community college student like? There's all these conceptions about their ability. In our history courses, one of the things that we do is we teach very few students that haven't met College Comp 1, so they're ready, they're prepared for college reading and writing. I have students that will inevitably transfer to a very high research facility, university, and I have some that will transfer to a lower tier university, but most of my students are transfer students. They are history majors. They are interested in the lower tuition of a community college, and so that they're often first generation, and so they're kind of tippy-toeing into academia. And they love the small class sizes. My classes, I teach a hybrid. Should tell you guys about load, right? My load is 15 credit hours a semester, fall and winter. So that correlates to, I teach 3 credit courses, so I teach 5 and 5. Okay, no one ran out of the room. Good, all right, you're with me still. All right. They're a combination of face-to-face and internet. So I teach about 3 face-to-face, 2 internet. Really, you'd probably find our loads aren't that different as far as when we look at how my class sizes are. So my face-to-face are only 25 students in a class, and my online are 18, which means that I get to have these wonderful discussions. And that's another thing. So let me tell you about these students. So they're so diverse, right? And they come with all these varied degrees of preparation, all these different backgrounds. Most of them are from a more working class background. They have, all races and ethnicities, and they savor learning. they value an education more than any students I've ever seen. And any time when I was, when I was in grad school still, and I, did some work at different schools, I've never seen such students. They're ready. And for me, that's awesome, because every day when I'm in the classroom, I get challenged. And so my ideas about history are constantly changing. I get to look at it through their eyes, varied perspectives. And then also, I focus on employability. I participate in the tuning project through the AHA. And one of the things I think community college professors do is we're looking at our students and what their concerns are, and their concerns are often employability. So it's really broadened my scope as far as what I get to look at for our profession and our discipline and the multiple careers that we might have. The lion's share promotion is based on your evaluation. There are some negatives. One of the biggest negatives, I think, is when we're looking at things like gender-biased evaluations and being a woman, when largely student evaluations are going to be the bulk of your promotion and your tenure. And so issues like that are far more critical to the community college professor than they perhaps would be to someone whose student evaluations do not underscore the majority of their promotion. For service, we do a lot. I am the chair of the history department. I sit on at least 6 committees. I was trying last night to count them, and I didn't have my CV, so it was really obnoxious. I sit on a board of historical organizations, board of directors in the community. There's such a community focus with our service, so it's about serving the college, but also serving the community. So we do a lot. And I also coordinate the Humanities Learning Center. That is not abnormal. I'm not an overachiever. I am a normal community college professor. So sitting on one committee is not going to probably get you far in the promotion and tenure process. As far as professional development goes, we also, I think there's a lot of confusion. People think, do they publish at all? We do publish, but you caught the part where we were teaching 5 and 5, and I sit on 6 committees and all the administrative work. So we don't publish as frequently. And articles are sufficient so we don't have a formal research agenda. And the lack of a publication requirement as far as an actual monograph means that, for me, I get to pursue a lot of different types of scholarship. And I get to look at different tracks. So it may seem odd to be looking at my lumbermen, which I look at, and then my barmaids on the other hand, spanning the mid-20th, the late 19th to the mid-20th century. And that's cool in a community college. You can do that. A lot of people go far broader with their scope of field. The focus on the community has led to things like, for instance, I get to frequently do NPR little radio spots. The history department, we own a broadcasting station. We own a PBS and NPR. So I get to do that. That's considered professional development. That's considered part of your promotion and tenure in a community college. I get to do a lot with digital history. I've written a grant to the NEH. I've gotten to do a lot of fun stuff that I might have had to delay in my career and do later in my career. But it is considered part of my professional development. Even I run my own website, Roaming Historian, and even that is considered part of the professional development of a scholar in the community college. So we probably have a lot of the same things too. Our commonalities are that we deal with bureaucracy too. We deal with the corporatization of higher ed too. I don't have as much time to pursue research and writing as much as I would like to. But overall, I think it is one of the most rewarding careers that one could have, is to be a community college professor. If nothing more, for those students, the way that they light up, their tenacity, their hunger to learn history, and their ability to, despite what can be, amazing adversity, they're often working, and like I said, they come from lower income backgrounds, and so some of them are even working full-time, going to school full-time, but they will put in the time, and they will be accountable, and they are amazing, so I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
I'm Andy Rotter. I teach at Colgate University. And just a brief description of Colgate. Despite its name, it's not really a university. It used to be a university. It used to have graduate programs, and now it has just a very small one in teaching. But it's a place of about 2,800 undergraduate students and 300 faculty members in a small town in upstate New York. And the small town, I think, matters, and I'll come back to that at the end of my remarks. Throughout one's career at Colgate and places like Colgate, and especially at tenure time, one is made aware of this holy trinity of academic life, similar to what Amy was saying, but described a little bit differently. Teaching, first of all, scholarship is the second leg of this stool for tenure, and then service is the third. So let me talk about those three a bit in order. Teaching, our standard teaching load is a 3-2 load. That is 3 one semester and 2 the next semester, so 5 courses altogether. Teaching is taken very seriously at Colgate, at other liberal arts colleges, and it matters a good deal at tenure time. I hadn't imagined somehow when I was in graduate school that there would be that much attention paid to pedagogy, how much discussion of pedagogy would go on at my institution. We have workshops, we have teaching tables. There are constant hallway discussions of pedagogy. We have meetings to talk about specific courses and techniques. And more than that, I am struck constantly, and I've been at Colgate for many years, by the amount of time people spend talking about not just their pedagogy, but their students by name. We really know them well. In hallway conversations, in bars, it's remarkable to me how often people talk knowingly and deeply and concernedly about their students and their work. We do have these evaluation forms that Amy mentioned, and as at Delta, at Colgate, they're very important to tenure time, and I think the bane of many junior faculty members' existence. The students take them seriously, perhaps not seriously enough, and they are poured over by the promotion and tenure committee at Colgate. We care a lot about what appears in those things, and it's like tissue samples. It feels very personal, very intimate, and no one really likes reading their own student evaluation of teaching forms. And I spend an awful lot of time as a senior member of a department and now a member of the Promotion and Tenure Committee trying to calm younger faculty about what these things mean and how to interpret them and how to improve them without teaching too much to them, because that's not such a good thing anyway. So all of that is a little scary, but the good news about teaching is that there are many ways to teach well at Colgate, and I think all of them are honored. I get away with a fairly traditional form of teaching most of the time. I do a lot of lecturing, a lot of discussion. Yes, I show film clips and things like that, and occasionally we'll entertain a debate among my students, but I don't do a whole lot of that. But my younger colleagues do that a lot, and they have wonderfully innovative ways to teach, and whatever works is fine. We don't insist on a particular pattern of pedagogy, which I think is nice. We have small classes too, like Delta, maybe not quite as small. Our survey classes, we have a kind of rump survey in US and European history, goes up to 35 students, but most of our classes are around 20, 18 or so. Our seminars are capped at 12, and so you have the same kind of intimacy with students that you do at a smaller place like Delta. There's a lot of support for teaching innovation. If you have an idea, if you have a course you want to do, there's usually money available to develop it. If you want to bring in speakers to help you with your class, that works too. I don't know that anyone has ever been turned down if he or she has had a good idea about teaching innovation. And you pretty much teach what you want within reason. We have certain prescribed courses. We have a certain number of courses at various levels in the department that have to be taught. So there's some negotiation that goes on between the individual faculty member and the chair. But for the most part, if you come in with a particular interest in something, that's what you can teach. And that's all pretty good. Scholarship. Now, scholarship is also vitally important at Colgate. To get tenure in history, and we're really very clear about this, this is not true of every department at the institution, but it's clear of the history department. To get tenure in history, you have to have a book, and it needs to be in substantially finished form. If it's not actually out between two covers, it needs to be done. You have to be done messing with it. I suppose an index can be done, but for the most part at tenure time, the book had better be finished. In addition to that, you need to have a credible idea of a second project. That can be expressed in various ways. You can have an article out, that's a good way to do it, obviously, a grant proposal, a book proposal, some description of what you're planning to do in the statement you write at tenure time, a couple of paragraphs showing that you've maybe been to an archive or two and have some sense of where you're going. And this is a fairly hard and fast rule in the department. It really needs to be a book. We've just started having the discussion that I think AHA is having more broadly, and perhaps some of you are familiar with, about whether that's a necessary standard for tenure, whether there ought to be some other ways to show evidence of scholarship or scholarly engagement. But that has not penetrated fully in the history department at Colgate. We're still looking for a book. It isn't graduate school. It's a place where we have a good number of historians. There are 18 of us, but we're spread out. You're not going to find a cadre of specialists who support what you do. You're not going to find multiple Latin Americanists or multiple South Asianists or East Asianists. You're the one doing that kind of work. So there is potentially at least a problem with hearing your own voice a little too much as you're trying to bring your book home. You don't have that community of scholars working on the same kind of material that you did in graduate school. And that, I think, can feel isolating. On the other hand, as with teaching, there's a lot of support for scholarship at Colgate. There is money for travel to collections and conferences. People are constantly coming in to give lectures. The department itself is very active. We have our own kind of lecture and discussion series where we talk to each other about our work and ongoing projects. So there's a lot of support in that way. If you need to go to a conference during the semester, no one bats an eye if you need to cancel class for a day or two to go to a conference or to go give a talk somewhere. It's just made very clear in the department and at Colgate generally that this really matters. Scholarship means a lot. If you pass your interim review at Colgate in your third year, and most people do, frankly, do pass third year review, you get a semester off with pay to finish your book, presumably, or get started on a second project if you're really fast. And you can take a year if you have the money or you get a grant. Colgate will pay for you to take a semester off. So there is that kind of reinforcement. We know we have a high bar for teaching and scholarship. And so the institution finds various ways to make sure that people can pass over the top of the bar, not meet the bar. I keep seeing that. You don't want to meet the bar. If you meet the bar, it really hurts, and you're not quite getting over the bar. You need to get over the bar in teaching and scholarship. The faculty at Colgate, and especially in the history department, if I may say so, is on the whole very productive. It's a good community of scholars. I don't know if the perception is out there that a liberal arts college doesn't really do this very much, but if so, that's not true. I think it's generally not true of liberal arts colleges, and I know it's not true of Colgate. This is a place that really cares about scholarship. Finally, let me say a few words about the mysterious category of service. This is not, I should say, about collegiality. Mean people do get tenure at Colgate. It isn't about being nice to your colleagues, although it's probably better if you are. It means that liberal arts colleges are small communities, and everyone has to kind of participate in the life of them. Something I didn't realize, again, in graduate school was the extent to which the faculty really do have a role in governing places. Again, I think this is less true of R1 institutions than of liberal arts colleges, but I think it's to a certain extent true of both. It does require a commitment on the part of faculty to stay engaged with the business of the institution. It's a better place for our involvement. So you're asked to serve on committees. You're asked to work within the department on various issues of curriculum, for example, or who should come in for a speakership or search committee work. There's always something like that at Colgate. Something else I wasn't prepared for in the way of service was administration. I was an associate professor, and I was tapped to be the department chair. And it really was, there was simply no one else to do it at that point. We had a kind of leadership vacuum, which was the only explanation for my having been asked to do it. And I ended up chairing the department for 6 years. I had no idea how to do this. I remember I came in, it must have been July 1st, 1990, whatever it was, and the previous chair was just so exhausted. I opened my office door, and there was a pile of files sitting on my chair. That was the transition moment, and I knew I was chair. She said nothing else to me, but, you know, here, and then I think she went off to a spa for a week. So my proudest accomplishment at Colgate is in the area of service. I got the faculty-student lounge refurnished and redecorated. And when I retire, I'm going to insist that a plaque go up, a small plaque, but it's going to have my name on it, that I managed to get this done. And I thought it was important to do. One of my senior colleagues made a passing remark one day that the lounge looked like the shoe department at Sears. And that stung. So I got it done, and I feel really good about that. Writing letters of recommendation for students. In graduate school, you probably don't do that. Suddenly, when you're an assistant professor, you have to. How do you do it? Well, you ask senior colleagues, you look at models, you guess. It's something you kind of figure out on the fly. And again, I put it in the category of service. I don't want to be disparaging about service. I think it's a very important thing, as I suggested at the outset of this section. It's a chance to see how the institution works. And it's a chance to meet colleagues from other departments at the university. And again, at a place like Colgate, that's very important to do. One word of advice: if you are going to serve on a committee before tenure, I suggest you not sit on anyone involving student life or student discipline. They're just a terrible time sink and often, I think, a waste of time. So just to close, as I threatened or promised earlier, let me say a few things about where liberal arts colleges tend to be and why this matters. Most liberal arts colleges are in small places. You think about Waterville, Maine, or Williamstown, Massachusetts, Gambier, Ohio, Northfield, Minnesota. Colgate is in Hamilton, New York. Hamilton College is not in Hamilton, New York. Hamilton College is in Clinton, New York. It's very confusing. But Hamilton, New York is a town of about 3,000 people. So when the students come back in August, the size of the town doubles instantly. It's a completely transformed place. And this takes some getting used to if you're not someone who's been in a small town before. There's no Starbucks. There's no Walmart. There's no Whole Foods. There's a Hamilton Whole Foods. There's a little shop that these two nice women run called Hamilton Whole Foods, and they have spanakopita on Fridays. It's really delightful, but it's not what you're used to if you go to Whole Foods a lot. There's no real airport there. There's a small airfield where the trustees land, but you're not allowed to use it. There's not a train. Twice a day, buses go in two different directions. You can go north to Utica. You can go south to Binghamton. Or you can just stay put. It's in farm country. There are dairy farms all around. And there are days in the spring when the town smells like dairy farms. It smells like manure. My favorite small town story about Hamilton was something that happened soon after we arrived there. The movie theater then was kind of a ramshackle place. It showed one film. And it had a marquee, and it would announce the movie time on the marquee. This is the movie name on the marquee, and then shown at 7 o'clock and 9:16. 9:16. So we asked the person who was running the movie theater, why 9:16? And he said, well, the 5 broke. So they only had one 5. And it fell off the marquee, so now the movie started at 9:16 because they had a 6. But with all of that, I think there's some real advantages to being in a small town. I walk or bike, or I sometimes ski to campus. It's very close. There's a pretty good university bookstore, which is downtown. The movie theater's been renovated. It's terrific. It shows independent films.
They fixed the five.
It's like almost a real place now. Real estate is affordable in Hamilton. There's a strong local food and drink movement. Most of the year it's really pretty. It's a very, very nice place. Not so much in March, but the rest of the year it's pretty nice. And most important, small places create or impose maybe a sense of community, a sense of obligation to each other. There's a kind of cult of niceness in Hamilton and at Colgate. One of the rules you learn is that if someone cuts you off in traffic, and this is fairly rare, I have to say, because there isn't much traffic, but if someone cuts you off in traffic, you do not flip them off. I did this in my first year there, and it turned out it was my wife's chair. You don't do it because of that, because you're likely to be in a committee meeting with that person later in the week. So that's where one lives, generally speaking, when one teaches at a liberal arts college.
Thank you. We now move to the urban section of the day.
Valerie, shall I go? Yeah. My name is Jamil Senel. I'm with the Georgia Humanities Council, Executive Director. And we really do shift from into a very different world. Valerie will also, I think, is a part of that world, but I'm Director of Georgia Humanities. And how many of you are familiar with your state humanities council or know something about it? Okay. And present also here is Allison Hutton, who is a member of my staff. She's in the front row. She's literature scholar. And then also Professor Melton right here, Maurice Melton, who is formerly of Albany State and now at Columbus State University. He's been a project scholar with us and friend of Georgia Humanities. The Humanities Councils are really kind of mysterious little organizations. In a nutshell, we get almost $1 million a year from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are actually authorized by the Congress of the United States. NEH doesn't always want to give us that $1 million. I don't blame them. It's been a rough time, but we are entitled to it. We take it. We have to match every dollar that we get from the federal government with private and state funds. So right off, let me tell you that my job as the director is to make sure that we raise at least $1 million and usually $1.5 million a year just to keep the lights on. So fundraising is a part of what I do. I am a historian. I have adjuncted a good part of my professional career. Spent 4 years in a university, and then a series of personal family issues took me out of that setting and into Washington, D.C., where I just knocked on doors looking for a job. This all happened in the middle of the year, and I wasn't going to get an academic job, and I ended up working for Claude Pepper, Congressman Claude Pepper of Florida, on the House Aging Committee, where I wrote and research reports on public policy and the elderly and conducted hearings, and basically I never left that kind of work. I consider the work that I do in humanities today very, very similar. And so all of those historical skills that I evolved as a graduate student and as a faculty member, I just simply employed in a public setting. And I must tell you that I believe that you cannot have enough PhDs in society. I feel very strongly about this. All of the work that I have done in preparing to be a scholar and in working as a scholar prepared me for basically being a public scholar, whatever that may mean. I mean, a lot of different ideas about what a public scholar is, but basically I think if you're a PhD and you have scholarly instincts, a public scholar is simply being who you are in a public setting with people who probably don't have PhDs, probably have college degrees. And all that you're doing is talking about life, the meaning of life, to be blunt, the meaning of life, the purpose of life, living in this world, living in this community. My office is just 5 blocks down on this street right here. And when we talk about living your life and the meaning of your life and the purpose of your life, we're talking about people who are highly educated, often in our public audiences. We're talking about business members. We're talking about civic activists and volunteers. We're talking about school teachers. We're talking about people who hang out at libraries and librarians. It's basically a real cross-section of American people who, Allison and I talk about this, who fundamentally what unites them all is they do read. They read books. And sometimes they're very busy during Monday through Friday. And what they really want to do is find some space in their personal lives to think about everything. And so what the humanities councils do is try to carve out a little bit of space in the public sphere for those people who are inclined to ask questions and who have curiosity about things. Carve out a little space where they can interact with scholars, usually, most often historians, who seem to be drawn to these public. Maurice is a historian, who seem to be, actually, I find that historians more than any of the other disciplines seem to be, of course, as you know too, Valerie, seem to be drawn into this public sphere. And part of it, I think, is that there's an automatic connection between the work of a historian, and it's very evident with Amy and Andy that these are historians who just sort of think in these terms. I find it's very easy for a historian to walk into a room who's also a historian who's a good teacher, and boom, the connection with the public and with the subject is just instantaneous. There's really not much of a transition other than to realize that the people in the audience have not been to graduate school. Most of them will have a college degree. The Humanities Council, because we have that word humanities in our name, nobody has any idea what we do. That's just the way it is. So when we've decided we don't even explain it anymore, we just simply do our projects. Because there are 50, actually 56, but there's one in every state, and we're all people who have advanced degrees in higher education. We used to be more PhDs in the executive directorship, but there's been a shift. I'm not quite sure I know why. But we're finding that coming into the executive directorships of humanities councils are people who have a little more community-based history. Sometimes they've headed up the Arts Council before, or they maybe have been on the staff of a historical society or museum. They have not come in. I've noticed that in recent years, the recruitment of leadership in the humanities councils has not come from the academic sector. It has kind of, we've caught people in mid-career or in transition from, for whatever reason, not going into higher ed, but loving all of that is involved in finding out about the humanities councils and thinking this is a great place to hang out for a while and then getting caught by it. I think that, and I'm going to conclude on this note, I think that there's a real hunger. I think we all know this as students. I mean, if you're a student, graduate student, you have it. You would not be going through what you're going through if you didn't care about this. I mean, you have a true, you're not going to get rewarded for it. I mean, we already know that. The reward is doing something good for somebody else who's just like you, maybe. I mean, if you're lucky, you get that kind of, of course, you have to write your books and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, we do the job that Amy does because she cares about the people in the audience and she cares about the messages that have to be conveyed to that audience. And in this society, increasingly, there is the sense that there is less and less and less public space for this conversation. So that's the mission of the Humanities Councils, really, is to open up a little space in the public side where we can bring scholars like Maurice Melton right here, and where we can also bring people who may not be scholars, but they may be tradition bearers, or they may be experts in an area informants about matters that are historically related, is try to bring them together with people who are looking for that and fund it. We give money away. We also raise money to give money away. We do a lot of work as a partner of other organizations and communities. We work closely with libraries. We do a lot of work with the Atlanta History Center, Georgia Historical Society, Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. We piggyback. You know, we're almost invisible in the state in some ways. We're too small to have much visibility, but what we can do is bring something to other statewide organizations or local organizations to help them in their mission of educating the public. And through this, we have quite a bit of scholars and passing through our work. Okay.
So I'm batting cleanup here, and I have discovered in recent years that I'm often I'm Valerie Paley. I work at the New York Historical Society in Manhattan, the second oldest historical society in the country, Massachusetts being the first, and the oldest museum in New York City, and there are many museums there now. I find that I'm often called upon to be on a panel like this to represent the so-called alternative careers. and for a PhD in history. And I take issue with that because to me, this is not an alternative. I chose not to go into the academy. In fact, I never had any aspirations to be a professor. So alternative to what? I think that, however, when I was studying for my PhD, the fact that I did want to do something in public history or work at a place like the New York Historical Society, it was very subversive to admit that. I didn't want my professors to know that I had no intention to be just like them or aspiration to be just like them. I am the Vice President, Chief Historian, Dean of Scholarly Programs, and the new Director for the Center for the Study of Women's History. It's an ever-growing title. People say, I need a rack card, not a business card. But I want all of those things to be on my card because it does describe what I do. As Chief Historian, I work on exhibits, I work on editorial work, I work on vetting historical content in a museum and library. As Dean of Scholarly Programs, I shepherd over a fellowship program, which is growing. We have 15 scholarly fellows in residence. I read all of their applications and convene the panels that select those fellows. And this new project, Director for the Center for the Study of Women's History, it is a somewhat growing initiative that the Historical Society has thrown its weight behind. To interpret the objects and material culture and art and the historical thinking that goes on within the walls of the Historical Society in the women's realm. It's somewhat underrepresented in the museum world, and we've decided to make a commitment to women's history. I'm not a women's historian, by the way, but having a PhD in U.S. history, I feel that that all of the American narrative includes women, so why should that be segregated? And that's sort of the path that I'm taking with setting up this center. Hopefully at some point a women's historian will take it over, but at this point it's a very procedural activity that I'm in the process of establishing. So how did I get a foothold at the New York Historical Society? A lot of the time, young scholars come to me and say, how can I be just like you? How can I get your job? And I kind of created my job in a way. I began as a volunteer. I was an English and Psych major as an undergrad and took some time off to raise my children and decided to go back for an MA in American Studies at Columbia in New York. And while I was doing that part-time, I became very, very immersed in the scholarly community. And when I finished, I was a volunteer at the Historical Society. I absolutely, absolutely loved working in the archives. I liked to be Bartleby the Scrivener, like writing little things and taking notes. I was a real...
Far from Bartleby.
I know, wasn't it? Yeah, that's true. And I had... I was a real history nerd, and I didn't really think I could do anything but that, but it just gave me such delight and joy, and I kept following that passion. As luck might have it, my mentor became the president of the Historical Society, saw me scribbling away, and said, "Why, you know, you can write. Why don't you be the editor of our journal?" Our journal was the whole Historical Society almost went belly up in the 1980s and 90s, and the journal fell by the wayside, and he wanted to resuscitate it, and I was the person he called upon to do it. Huge opportunity for me, so I ran with that, and I found there was a scholarly board that just assumed I had a PhD, and I felt like a giant fraud. And I think that's women feel more fraudulent than men generally. I've heard this just sort of anecdotally, but I felt like I had to go get a PhD so I could say, yes, I in fact was Dr. Paley and not just nodding when people called me Dr. Paley. So I followed that passion, and instead of becoming an archivist, as I had sort of intended to do, I applied for a PhD program. I was already a little bit too old, I thought, to be in grad school, but I got in, loved it, and so in a way, the PhD was not a means to an end, but part of a process of discovery, of testing my own mettle, but also learning in a very different sort of way about historical problems, historical thinking, learning how to do history and do it well. A typical day for me, like everyone at the table, consists of meetings, meetings, meetings. One does not have the time for research. I really have felt really terrible that it's a new year and I still don't have my dissertation published or even a précis for it that I can shop around, because I don't have the time to go shopping around at the book displays to the publishers. I speak to the press a lot. One learns how to be media savvy in the public history arena. I have to fundraise as well. It means a lot of lunches, a lot of schmoozing. This right now, I'm in a fellowship cycle. In fact, if anyone wants to apply, we extended the fellowship. It's pretty decent fellowships. Look on our website, nyhistory.org, just a pitch. And that's a daunting process. So all this by way of saying I didn't need a PhD to do this, really, but it makes me better at what I do. And in a way, I really did need a PhD to do this. It gives me some street cred, but it affects the way I think about what I do and how I relate to people about history. The big irony is I never wanted to teach, but I do teach at Columbia. I teach a museum studies course in a seminar in American Studies, which has been really fun. So perhaps I protest too much about the teaching piece, but one learns how to communicate, and that teaching is about communication. So that's what I do.
Thank you. I'm going to stand simply so I can see the whole room. Those were 4 just wonderful little vignettes. I thought, I hope other people enjoyed this as much as I did. I learned a lot. And what struck me as the kind of theme that ran through all 4 of these is just simply the passion that people had. I mean, these are people who love what they do and know why they do it. And I think that's something that is really quite special. And I'm not sure that all professions could necessarily say that. But it really struck me, listening to the 4 of you, that you really care. And it really matters. And you really have fun, even in the lousy bits. And I mean, there are lousy bits in every job, right? But that, for me, was just really, really striking, was just that immense sort of interest and passion and care. So at this point, I'm going to throw this open. Questions, comments, discussion. I don't know how many of you are interested in the different bits of things that we've looked at here, if you have specific questions, if you have more general questions, but we are completely and utterly open, and we have 3/4 of an hour, so we're in great shape. Yes, please.
Michael Skaggs, University of Notre Dame. A question occurred to me while Dr. French was speaking, but I think it applies to all of you. Could you offer some commentary on how you approach your jobs across the university as scholars? Because I think a lot of us in grad school look at the job market and think, I don't know what's going to happen. We think, even if I start a career outside the academy that uses my PhD training, how do I still get to be a scholar, whatever I'm doing, whether it's at the Historical Society, Humanities Council? If I'm not in an academic department, how do I still advance myself as a scholar?
I'll start, but I think we probably all have a little different approach to that. So for me, I think I became a better scholar because of my teaching. Because my students forced me, and really, it's a strong word, but to do my job well, to have this breadth of knowledge, I had to really think about every part of history from every different angle. And so it changed what I wanted to write about. I've sat to my former advisor's chagrin, I think, probably, but I pretty much sat on my dissertation, and then I just pushed it away. And I went to, investigating barmaids, and now I'm on a whole nother track anyways, but I have so much fun with it. So I was able to redefine what scholarship meant to me. But one of the things that I do is I carry these journals with me everywhere. This happens to be my scholarly thoughts journal. And so as ideas come to me, I write them down, and then just like I think any other scholar, I get very disciplined. I create my little agenda as to what I'm going to do. I just don't have to file it with anybody. There's no committee looking at it, so it's just my personal agenda that I make for myself to keep my scholarship going.
Yeah, that was really helpful because I feel the same way about teaching and scholarship. We're trained to say that, interestingly. We're supposed to say, oh, well, teaching supports scholarship and vice versa and all that. And it actually turns out to be true. It changes, as Amy said, it changes the way, at least I think about what I write and what I want to write and how, especially how I write it, to be in the classroom, to get asked wonderfully basic kinds of questions by my students. Oh, I need to explain this better. And the other thing is that I said before, and it's true that we get to teach what we want to teach, but it doesn't mean I'm always teaching. I'm a specialist in the history of U.S. foreign relations. I'm not just doing that. We're all doing survey work. We're all doing other stuff. I do recent U.S. history. And we have an interdisciplinary core curriculum at Colgate in which I've dabbled some. I have colleagues who are much more enthusiastic about it than I am. But that amount of participation in that has broadened the way I think about historical questions. Conversations with anthropologists made me think more about culture. When I did a project on U.S.-India relations, it could have been a very standard kind of diplomatic history. It wasn't because of my own discussions with anthropologists. I began to think more broadly about what that relationship might mean beyond the usual kind of diplomatic correspondence that goes on between nations. So, yeah, I'm with her.
I think, as Valerie put it, I think very well, is that when you're thrown into a job and you are a historian and you retain your active interest in history and you have some scholarly aspirations, maybe perhaps to publish, to make presentations at conferences, that will happen. It will just grow out of the work that you do in that public setting. I'll give you an example of myself. We have been involved in Civil War projects. That's been a major theme of ours for the past 4 to 5 years, and I think we've had quite a positive impact in the state. And so naturally, I have become more interested in the history of the Battle of Atlanta, especially, Sherman's March, but also the civil rights movement, the long civil rights movement. And so I've done some writing, written a few articles on that for the Georgia Historical Quarterly, which is an important, I think, scholarly magazine. But also, I think, I've gotten interested in the phenomenon of public history itself. And so I've become something of a historian of the Humanities Council. I published in the Journal of Public History recently on this. So it just grows out of your own interests. We have a partnership with the University of Georgia Press. We give them a little money to publish books that we and they think will have a scholarly audience, and then we help promote it. And that means you're going to end up having a lot of affection for those projects that are up your alley, in my case, history, and where you see opportunities to kind of find a place in that project, you will get pulled in. And then you may realize, gosh, I love this. I want to write a little something. You may do an op-ed in a newspaper. You can also, I know a number of people in the State Humanities Councils are adjunct professors. I taught at Emory for 10 years. And so you kind of keep yourself a little bit in the currency of your colleagues in the neighborhood. So it's all of these things are possibilities. They're all just sort of driven by what you want to do. Nobody's going to stop you except the time that you have in the day to do. But if you're really ambitious, these are all, we live 7-day-a-week lives. The cell phone is always out. There's lots of opportunity to pursue, I think, those interests. Increasingly, I believe you will be called upon, as I was for this session, you'll be called upon by our colleagues in higher education to talk about the work that we're doing because it's becoming more and more important for lots and lots of reasons. So I think this is an opportunity to do some, for lack of a better word, I hardly think of it as non-traditional because we've always kind of been here in a way, we just now have PhDs. It's a really good time to sort of explore these boundaries in society, and Lord knows our society needs this kind of expertise in the mix of talking about who we are.
Absolutely, I couldn't say it better myself, but I would add to that in my own case, I have the ability and the wonderful opportunity to read scholarly applications for fellowships. So I see what the latest scholarship is, and I understand what where it falls into a particular pattern, I wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise. And I know what I'm reading, which someone else wouldn't necessarily, without a PhD, wouldn't know that. But often I'm called upon to write. I recently was pulled into a project that started to implode, and they needed someone who knew how to do scholarly research and writing for an exhibition. And I did it very, very quickly on short order, and it was sort of fun to wear sweatpants in the morning and go to the library and can't come into a meeting because I'm doing my scholarly work. It was fun. It was really fun, and I could do it. I was so excited about that. This might sound a little bit superficial, but one also is a scholar by example in the public realm. You just, by your own example, you can show that you know something about a topic or about a discipline, and are willing to share that with people.
Thank you. Yes.
Thomas Green at Clark University. My question goes to Jamil and Valerie. And Valerie has started answering it, I have to say now with your more recent comments. The question is, if somebody told you, the two of you, okay, and I have no problem with PhD, or actually I don't have a problem with PhD at all, but this is an issue that always comes up when it is about so-called alternative careers. If somebody told you, well, it's nice that you have a PhD, but you could have gotten an MA in 2 instead of whatever you needed, 5 to 7 years on average, and could do your job the same way you do it now. Why did you waste 5 or 7 years of your life on getting a PhD, and why did whoever, which institution, whatever, pay, give money? I mean, overall it's $100,000 or so in stipends or MA-ships, whatever, to provide you a PhD. What's the rationale of that?
Could people at the back hear that? If you could you reprise the question so that, would you mind reprising the question?
The question essentially was, why did we waste our time on a PhD to do what we do, and waste good fellowship money for other scholars who wanted to be professors, that sort of thing? And that's a really good question. And in fact, there were several mentors, scholars, people that knew me that twisted my arm. I didn't think it was necessary at all. And often when I was really in the weeds of the program, I thought, why am I doing this? I don't need to do this, and I don't really know a whole lot more than I did 3 years ago. But in fact, I did learn a lot more. You read 1,000 books. How many thousands of books do you have to read to pass the orals? It did equip me for something different. And perhaps that's why it was considered somewhat subversive. Why are you wasting a spot in this cohort if you're not going to be a professor? But I think there are very different ways of expressing history to the public. Not only it's a very small sample of people who are lucky enough to go to college, university, elite colleges or universities. How about the rest of them? I mean, the people in community college, the people who never have the opportunity to engage in historical thinking. I feel it's my responsibility as the chief historian at the New York Historical Society to apply what I know to thinking, not dumbing down history, but rather being efficient at how we express it to the public. And then we've done a service to the rest of the world in a way. I know I'm not as good a professor as the professors that I studied under at Columbia, but I'm teaching in a very different way, and I think I needed the PhD to be able to do that and do it well.
Do you want me? Yeah. I think this does apply to me as well, because I do, at community colleges, you need only a master's degree. You don't have to have a PhD, though increasingly that is changing. Our last search committee, in fact, our last 2 search committees, we saw a large number of PhDs as candidates. But the easy question is, I love what I learned getting a PhD. And it wouldn't have happened had I not gone through the entire doctoral program. Writing a dissertation fundamentally changed the way I think about history, the way I look at history, the way I look at the world in general. the research skills that I learned while writing my dissertation, the writing skills. I learned I was a horrible writer. And then I learned how to rewrite. Those are skills that, that go far and beyond what I learned in the classroom. Although my seminars were great learning experiences and my comprehensive exams were another learning experience, I think going the full way for the PhD gives you something that you just don't get at the other levels.
I think it's a big question. That's a good question. We just hired Allison, and Allison is ABD in Early American Literature, and she was by far the best applicant that we had. We had no PhDs applying for the job. Now, I wonder if PhD had applied and was really passionate about working with the public, how would they have presented themselves? What might they have said about what they want to do? How might they have related to me? As a historian, in terms of thinking about scholarship in the public, I don't know. We just don't have many PhDs looking for jobs, to be honest with you, in the area of work that I do. And on the other hand, I totally agree with what Amy said. I really believe that there is an advantage, at least at the leadership level of nonprofit organizations, which is, I think, where Valerie is also. At the leadership level, you have all that Amy talked about, the total person that is created by the process of the production of a PhD, a tremendous commitment to get that. And when that moves out of the graduate program into any community, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in a historical society, whether it's in a museum, whether it's in a humanities council, you are projecting a set of values that you developed over many years of work. And that subtly works its way into how you talk about the value of the humanities or the value of history. And as we know, and as you know, not many people are talking about that. I mean, we are undervalued, and we will continue to be undervalued until we find our place in that public conversation. When we do find that place, we're not going to change the world, but a lot of people out there, and many of them are our journalistic partners in journalism, will give this voice more play. And that's really the battle that we've had with Georgia Humanities here in Georgia. I'll give you one example. In 2001, Governor Roy Barnes lost re-election as the governor of Georgia. How many of you have ever heard of Roy Barnes? Okay. Roy Barnes changed the Georgia state flag, took the Confederate battle flag out of the Georgia state flag, lost the election. Wow. Okay? First Democrat since Reconstruction to lose a gubernatorial election, defeated by a man who changed his affiliation a year before as a Republican, former Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives. Today, he would have been reelected. That is the difference, I think, that having PhDs involved in public discourse, we threw ourselves into these programs. The difference of having PhDs involved in public is an appreciation of the subtleties of interpretation that can be worked into your public scholarship without yelling about it, without necessarily saying, this is a war, with the lost cause people. No, subtly, you change the way the public looks. I think that's the value added of an advanced degree, of a real professional expertise, because you know how to operate with, frankly, very high-level thought. But if you're in a public sphere, you also know you depend on the donations that come to the New York Historical Society, or you're not going to, you're simply not going to make it. And I think there's a role, that role right there is what I would say. In the leadership of American culture, there's a role right there for the PhD in all humanities fields. There's simply no replacement for that except for world-class journalists who really have a great deal, go through the same kind of training, essentially.
Thank you. We're there, and then there, and then there. Yeah.
I'm Ken Ledford, the History Department in Case Western Reserve. And I'm interested in what practical advice the panel might give those of us who chair departments or are directors of graduate studies to help our students in a PhD program. And I know there's been a lot of conversation. It's not Plan B. Tony Grafton keeps talking about that. But the AHA's market And many of the structures of the institution of the market still provide the greatest information about the availability of jobs in the academy. And that's in the academy. There's universities and colleges from R1 to including distinguished elite liberal arts colleges like Colgate. Sometimes you can see some community college jobs, but it's not the full gamut. I'm on the board of Ohio Humanities, and the year before I joined, they did a search for a program officer and hired a PhD historian, somebody just coming out of a program. I didn't know about that job to recommend it to any of our graduates.
Yeah.
What advice can you give those of us who are trying to broaden the perspectives and options for all of these rewarding careers to make our students aware of the full panoply when the market structures still drive in one direction? We're trying to change, I understand that, but we're acting now and the change isn't going to be effectuated for some time.
Could I start with that one? When I became vice president of the professional division, one of the questions that I asked my colleagues on the AHA staff was why we don't advertise community college jobs in perspectives. And it turns out there are very good reasons that have nothing to do with us not wanting to. It's to do with the way that community colleges are hiring, and they're often not hiring specifically as historians, right? I think that's not always the case. Sometimes humanities jobs. But apparently the way that community colleges, I'm not sure if it's the advertising, Amy can probably correct me on this, but there's no kind of central place in which we can go to community colleges. It's all very separated. So we would literally have to reach out individually to community colleges, hundreds and thousands of them, in a way that is not feasible. Right, but the problem is we have a very small staff at the AHA and the rest of us do this for free. And there's only so many days in the week, but we would literally have to reach out to hundreds and hundreds of colleges individually, and obviously we can't do that. The thing is, universities and colleges already know about us. Community colleges, we would have to do the outreach, and we're starting to do that, there's no question, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight, as you said. So that's just one little piece of it, and Amy, you can probably correct whatever I got wrong there, as I'm sure I got something wrong there.
We do hire for historians. That was a little. We generally do have. It's a historian position. It will be looking for, and it'll be further kind of subdivided by divisions, and it gets either social science or humanities division. Kind of goes both ways. One of the things that this came up recently when my colleague, we were looking for a temporary replacement for her. She was going into an administrative position. And we were sitting with our HR department and trying to think about how are we going to announce this position. And so thankfully, she and I, that was one of the things we made sure. We made sure that AHA knew about it. We made sure that our HR department contacted HNET, doing different things. I think there has to be some onus on each of the community colleges, and that's why this is an important conversation to be having right now. So I'm very glad that you asked that question, because we generally do have to tell our human resources department where, and I don't think a lot of people in a community college maybe necessarily know that from the get-go. I certainly didn't. And it was just she and I kind of looking and saying, why don't we see community colleges more frequently in the Chronicle and in different places and in perspectives? And so we asked, and our HR rep says, oh, we can do that. Yeah.
So, Amy,
so it was just simply, oh, okay, well then do it. Thanks.
Amy, where do community colleges advertise their jobs? Where would one go if one wanted to work in a community college? Where would you look for the job ad?
There is the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium, HERC, is one side. I can't believe it tells you I'm in academia. I know every acronym. There's Inside Higher Ed Jobs is another popular one for.
Do they use H jobs?
If they're asked, and that was something that we had to do, is we had to say that they should. But no, that is not, because the HR people are, generally quite, they're generalists. We have much smaller human resources departments. And they're the ones who, so we put together our search committee, but HR is the one doing all the announcements and
You
things.
overestimate the sophistication of university-level searches for faculty. They're all done voluntarily by faculty members.
Right, but because it's coming out of a department, we know to advertise in places like HNet and Perspectives is the difference. Does anyone else want to speak to this?
One thing I'd like to add, though, one of the things, and this struck me twice in the past week. Monday, I went out to lunch with my primary advisory. Last night, I ran into one of my dissertation committee members and a person who I'd read for and respect immensely. And one of the things that, both of them said, wow, you're doing something much different with your PhD than we thought you would. And I have, since I took my PhD, I've often thought, am I making them proud? And I think that's the best thing we can do as advisors of graduate students is make sure that they recognize that the community college track will make them proud. And that, when they're out there and that the Humanities Council, the historical organization, when they're out there teaching people about the history, when we're out there doing what we do best, which is open that public discourse, like Jamil said, about history, that you are going to make them proud because I think that matters a lot to them. And I think a lot of people maybe choose tracks because they're trying to make their advisor proud.
I think that's a really, really important strategic question for the profession. I really do. And I think it's important because there's no easy answer for it, but I think all of us, I think you nailed it, all of us see this as a problem. I'll give you an example. Historians at Georgia State don't necessarily talk to historians at the University of Georgia. If there's a job search, it could be on opposite ends of the universe. It doesn't matter. We do a lot of work with history faculty in the metro area community colleges, perimeter colleges, hundreds of history faculty. Not a single person applied for a job opening that we had as a program person, and yet we're funding them. Allison, we got the best person in the world, don't get me wrong. But why didn't, and nobody, and the problem is that we're all in silos, and in those silos, we're all very busy, and nobody has a way of figuring out or taking the time or making it a priority to connect some of these silos at some level. But I'll give you an example. I think every now and then, an article in AHA Perspectives would do a ton. It would do a ton right there by simply, boy, the guy who wrote this article or the woman who wrote this article is just down the street. I mean, I think somebody got a grant from them last week. You know what I'm saying? We've got to find more bridging across these divides in a sector of our work that doesn't have money or staff to get anything done. We're struggling to get our work done. But it's more important now, I think, than ever. We all know why. Because of what's happening on our campuses, what's happening in our society, what's happening in our economy. We're going to have to get these little pieces together and defend ourselves better by being more united, I think, as a historical voice. But I think that, and I must say, I think that as busy as the AHA is, it is our national leadership organization in the humanities of PhDs with a professional division. I think the AHA has got to figure out how can it make a dent in this.
Well, I just would say, I was on the professional division for 3 years, and the AHA is doing this, it's trying. There's an enormous culture of expectation about what graduate students are there to do. When people apply to do PhD programs in history, their first thought is, I want to do what my professors do. That's what they want to do. And even more than that, I think, their advisors in graduate school want them to do that and expect them to do that. Changing that culture of expectation, making sure that another choice is not a plan B or some kind of booby prize is very difficult. There have been lots of articles and perspectives about this. I think in defense of AHA, they're trying very hard to turn this around.
I understand that. I actually think that is beginning to change. I see it with my colleagues. In an undergraduate issues and methods course for history majors, have them read both the Jim Banner books. I have the graduate students, when I teach the graduate level, of course, read that. So it's the practical question of how we get from here to there. You know, we could do it in a fragmented way. I could ask my department assistant to get on the mailing list of all 56 humanities councils so that when any one of them has a vacancy, we would have access to that. I'm not sure how much the graduate students would use that. The graduate students, and I'd let them speak for themselves, the ones who are here, I think are very sensitive to all these challenges in the market. There are those for whom public history in some form or community college teaching in some form is their plan A. How do I facilitate their getting the market information for them to accomplish their plan A?
Rob, did you want to come in on that specifically? Because if so, I'll shortcut the others, but I've got two people. But if it's on this point, go ahead.
I just want to point out that part of the reason we did the article in 2013.
This is Rob Townsend, who used to work for the AHA, and we miss him very much.
I mean, so in some ways it's easier to track PhDs into jobs than it is to track all the jobs that a PhD might potentially get. And so that's why I mean, trying to do this for 15 years.
Sure.
I mean, you can imagine the challenges. I mean, just looking at the folks up there, you can imagine the challenges of trying to track all the potential jobs that advertised that they got. And one of the challenges too is that the job market, even for community colleges, they're not advertised prospectus rates because they tend to think in terms of a more localized market. And that was one of the issues that came up. Just, you know, when you look at it, PhDs from Harvard don't tend to go to, you know, the directional state universities in Illinois and Wisconsin, for instance. And so there are a lot of very different job markets, even as to where different PhDs from different universities will go. But I call you just sort of suggest folks go back to the article that has the same name as this session that was published on the website in 2013, because there we tried to basically do a pie chart to show where the PhDs.
Right. I mean, I start with that, but I use your charts in my PowerPoints.
Yeah.
So.
I'd like to move to the next question if that's okay, but let me just say that if anybody has ideas about how we can improve the jobs searching section of Perspectives so that we do include other kinds of things, please get in touch with us, the professional division.
Can I just make one
incredibly briefly, because I've got two more people waiting.
Go right ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. Thank you.
Wanted to say, I think it's, of course, a very important discussion to have about the unfortunately named alternative careers for PhD students. But I'm also really struck by how much the panel is really also commenting on a sense of an alternative experience with history. Because I teach at University of Buffalo in the SUNY schools, and when I was director of undergraduate studies, I was talking to a student, but the students with me heard a father walk past and say, you know, at the big open house of accepted students, oh, history, well, there's something you're never gonna get a job with. Yeah, you know, I engage a lot with the community, partly through my spouse and things that I volunteer with in Buffalo. I can't tell you how many people over about the age of 60 who are looking to retire, you know, these are the people, right, who go to the Humanities Council events. They love history. So what happens in that 40-year span when they're telling their kids, I love history, but you better not study that, right? So I think it's a really great set of remarks to also remind us that it's not just an alternative possibility for our PhD students, but if we can also just continue to nurture this, this will also be in our undergraduate classes, right? Because that sense of bringing history and showing the engagement and excitement of it, also perhaps helping us from making the pratfall of historical statements that we hear from politicians. This is also very important to higher education and to the profession itself. So I really appreciate the wide-ranging set of remarks, really more like a comment than a question.
Sure, I'm Tim Moran. I just completed at Amy's alma mater. And I'm listening to this alternative career discussion and thinking of my colleagues. Quite frankly, they look like rabbits headed toward a wood chipper. And part is because nobody quite knows how to value a PhD outside of academia. So my question is, have we as the AHA done any work in informing people of what a PhD ought to be worth in that job market?
I would just jump in here because I don't want anything that I've said to be seen as criticizing the AHA. I believe, however, this is a big problem. This is a strategic problem. And it's important to put an article, you know, in perspectives. It's important to have a committee. But I mean, I think we're dealing with something that is almost cultural. And I think you raise a very important point. And now, how we go about doing that is, I think, a separate conversation than thinking about how we can fit it into the things that we have to get done. Now, I don't know what that is, but I would say this is, you know, when we talk about silos and how you bridge silos, we're not talking about tinkering here and appointing a committee. Now, one of the things that I have felt, I'll just go ahead and say this, that would make a big difference for the AHA, is if it had another way for a president of the AHA, and maybe it is honorary president, I don't know, who would be a writer or a journalist who is well known for having reached the public audience, having transformed thought about something, and they get to know, and in that year, we expect them to give a talk, you know, to the AHA. We ask them for that year to be available to the media and to the press to talk about their work, and perhaps to talk about why history PhDs are so vital. Because what we know is all the books that come out by journalists are on generally historical subjects, and they use your dissertations and your academic press books. And we need them to tell everybody they couldn't be a journalist without this, without the scholarly infrastructure and the work of PhDs. In that regard, I think if the AHA doesn't do it, I just don't know, and if the AHA can't quite figure out how to get its arms around this question, and it's a many years kind of a question for us to handle, nobody else is going to do it. I love the you know, the OAH, but we're really talking here about something else.
I hope you're going to send me a proposal about that.
Well, I sent one to Jim.
Oh, you've done it.
I did.
Great.
I sent one to
Yeah.
Jim.
I have a PhD. I'm closing out a career at an independent school. Published 3 books, and think it's a really great alternative. What stands in the way is the American Historical Association's inability to convince the National Council of Social Studies that history is the subject. Does anybody want to address that? Lost that fight.
Well, yeah.
Actually, I was on a committee with that. They were actually quite concerned and quite engaged on this. They're less negative about history as a subject. They were actually quite open to this. And I don't think, I think we tend to see them as the enemy. I don't think they really see themselves as pushing us out. So I guess I'd say you're wrong on that.
But that's where the job offers are.
Well, but I think fundamentally there's pressure from the institutions of the state. It's really not NCCSS as the enemy.
You see, I think this is why we need to have a strategy session at a national level with an organization like the AHA. I'm in Georgia. I can tell you that it is.
Use the mic. So people
Oh,
can hear.
it's impenetrable. In the state education bureaucracy, it is a separate world from the National Association. The National Association loves the idea of cooperating with the AHA, but these are driven, as you know, these are driven at the state and local level. Now, we're not going to change that tomorrow, but what can we do? I think that is, again, we're back to the question of given what the problems are, and AHA has done things over the years to try to heal that connection with the classroom teacher in schools. What can we do really here in early in the 21st century to deal with this? I think it's a high level, I frankly think it's a very high level discussion that the leadership, people such as yourself, people such as the leadership of the AHA need to sit down, and this is not going to get solved in 10 minutes. We're really talking about understanding different cultures and how we bridge these different cultures. Mm-hmm. And again, I would say there are friends of the AHA, such as yourself, who are at meetings like this, who know how these things operate in the independent school system and in the public school system, and maybe it's a state that we lift up. Maybe it's, it's how we begin a conversation about this as a sophisticated problem, requiring a sophisticated solution, not just another division or another committee. But I think, by the way, across the board, in public history, in community colleges, in schools, we are at the level now where if we do not figure out how to do this, our voice is, and I'm talking about the PhD voice, is just about gone in the public sphere. I'm afraid that is kind of the case.
One of the things that, and this is going back to Tim's comment, is that we perhaps do not do as good a job of showing our market value in a profession where we have to show our market value. A professor of law, it's very easy for a board of regents or administrators to look and say, here's their market value. On the market, they could charge so much as an attorney. They're worth $500 an hour. That's what we're going to pay them. We are in a little bit more nebulous zone, as we all know. What can we do? That isn't to say, though, that we can't easily show what our market value could be. I think that it just needs some creativity to show and champion the humanities as a whole, history in particular, showing that there are many things we can do, that we can consult. I often sound like, you know, a darned capitalist, but I think that there is a price for that we should be putting on our work. And to, you know, even as simple as thinking about what are our consultant fees. Even if we are not doing consultant works, how would you value your time if somebody was? This is a conversation that we could get going, and that's something I think that maybe is a smaller piece that might be more manageable in the beginning with, how much are we worth, folks? You know, and if we start determining that kind of common, you know, consulting fee level dollar, then we could start thinking a little bit more about what our market value is.
There's a website called Word Rates, I think it's called, or Rate Word, something like that, which actually does precisely this and shows people what what you should be charging for certain kinds of writing and things. I think it's Word Rates. Do you know
Word
that?
Rates?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. If I've got that wrong, email me and I'll send it to you. We have a person. You had your hand up? Yeah.
So I came in a little bit late, but I want to pick up on some of these themes. I'm Ed Ballison from Duke. So I just would encourage the profession to think even more ambitiously. I don't mean to suggest that thinking about re-engaging with local and state level educational frameworks is a bad thing to do. Absolutely. I don't want to suggest that public history isn't crucially important to the society it is. But historians play important roles in government. They play important roles in management consulting firms. The first thing a management consulting firm does is a history of the organization that it is going to offer advice about. Absolutely. Historical expertise is significant in many, many contexts across our society and other societies, and we do not think creatively about how to prepare doctoral students for those opportunities. I would point out as well that those markets are different. There is, it's not that, the issue there is not somehow improving the information flow. Those are not markets where there's a job and it's posted and 200 people apply for it and one person gets it. People make their jobs in those.
Sure, I think that's right.
And so one further point, who would people say the most influential doctorate in history is in the United States right now? I would have two suggestions there. One is Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff, and the second is Joshua Micah Marshall, who has about 1.5 million people reading him every day on Talking Points Memo and is reinventing investigative journalism.
I just want to say, I totally agree with that, because I started out in DC working in the Congress. I ran across a number of my buddies from graduate school who I never knew that they were in DC too, who were chairing study groups in Congress, who were working with nonprofit policy-making organizations, who had become editors of national trade associations, and they brought, and actually, and particularly in the field of aging, a number of the people who were executives in those fields were basically historians who gravitated into this, by accident. But I think that's a very good challenge to us, is to go, and I think I talked a little bit with you, is to go back and to identify these people who are PhDs, but they don't talk about it because they're in a very different setting. But their mindset, their ability to contextualize, their respect for research, their reading allows them to be a very unique voice in our society. And that's why I'm thinking somebody like some of the gentlemen in this case that you raised, bringing them into our community, and then what they'll end up doing is talking more. We need more people that you're talking about how even they got into the position to be the kind of voice that they are. And I think a lot of it has to do with that education.
And the National History Center, which is a sort of satellite or sister organization to the AHA, is trying to do precisely that. It's based in Washington. It's not wholly Washington, but it is trying to do that. So, you know, again, AHA is working, but you don't change Rome in a day, right? You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and we can't change things that quickly, but we're working on it. We've got time for one more comment. Yep.
Museum. Thank you for everything. Very informative. My question here is the following. Okay, so it's great. Loads of students in PhD right now starting their career. Do you have examples of type or career tracks? Because this question will be the same for them all in 5 years or 10 years. So basically, do you have example of people switching from, let's say, learned societies, museums, state companies into community college or like classical university prototype careers, or actually moving from community college into the learned society, museum, etc.? Thanks.
I think these are really adding up to something here, these kinds of comments. Yes, I know a number of people, and they don't even think of themselves anymore as PhDs. In fact, one of them is involved in employee benefits for corporate America. He is a specialist, and he just retired. He is a Renaissance Reformation PhD. And he understands speaking with public audiences. He understands research. He understands social change. And he's done very well in his profession. He's somewhat not happy about the fact that he spent all that time getting a PhD and then couldn't get a job, as a Renaissance Reformation person. But you know what? We created a real opportunity for corporate America in terms of retirement benefits and public policy by training that guy. And I think we need to, somehow we need to capture that story. I mean, he's a historian in public sector, but doesn't talk about himself that way.
Your comment is one that I think about quite frequently recently. And I know Rob Townsend has done just a phenomenal job trying to track where our history major is going. Of course, there's still, I think he would agree with me, would you not, that there's still so much more work to be done on that level. And so, part of what's not being captured too are people like myself. With my undergraduate in history, I became a stockbroker. And I was very good at it because I can track change over time. And that actually happens to be a really good skill when you're trying to anticipate stocks. Then I go back. So, but anybody who looks at me will just, put me in one category. That kind of earlier career post-baccalaureate is being, there's a lot more information that we need to get on that. And so, but one man in the back of the room can't be doing it, all. And so we have to.
Although he's doing a pretty good job.
He's doing a great job, but, it needs to be that we perhaps at the levels of the community college and at the university levels, really start tracking more of our graduates. And I think that's a conversation that a lot of community colleges are doing now that we haven't done in the past. And it's something that we are saying now is, where are graduates going? What are they actually doing? And that could be the start of helping to build this database of knowledge.
I'm sorry not to be able to take any more questions, but we're out of time. I think ending on Amy's stockbroker past is a great way to end. I think it's been a wonderful session. Thank you so much for your input, and I hope you'll join me in congratulating our panelists on a really fabulous panel.